Welcome back to the channel, you guys. Today we're making a fancy belt for my friend who's getting married. I'm actually gonna marry them on the 12th of November. So we got this belt. It's a fancy belt with a puff in it. So stay tuned for that. And also stay tuned for the story of how they met, because it's a little scandalous. Okay guys, so first step that we're gonna do today is measure out how long our belt's gonna be. So my buddy's waist from the base of the buckle to the hole he currently uses on a belt he's already using is 33 inches. So for this build, we want to add 9 inches for our total length, because there's like some area where you have to fold it, and then we want more holes, and then the end. So 33 plus 9 is 42. So I pre-cut this strap right here. The belt that we're gonna be making is 1 1/4 inch. Typically, really casual belts are 1 1/2, but something a little higher end is usually 1 1/4. So we have a 1 1/4 inch brass buckle. And then this strap here, like I said, is 42 inches long, and then it's 3/4 inches wide. And I already pre-cut that. That's because we're gonna have 1/4 inch on each side to get our 1 1/4 inches where we're gonna put the seam. So essentially what this is this little layer creates a little puff so that the seams sit a little lower. Just creates like a really high-end look. You'll see them a lot in department stores. A lot of times they're not leather, but they've copied like the high-end design and adapted it towards using pleather and vegan leather, right? So once we've done that, use your strap cutter, cut 3/4 inches for this, and then just make this the length of the total belt, the 42 inches. And then what we need to do is pick our leather. So for the top, we're gonna do this Whiskey Butero. And for the liner, we're gonna do this natural Butero. I like natural on the back. I just think it looks good. A lot of times it's calf leather. I don't use calf leather because it's kind of sad. It is a byproduct of the veal industry, which kind of bums me out a little bit. I know there's like some cognitive dissonance there, because why is a baby cow worth more than a grown-up cow? I don't know, but I don't like it, so we don't use it. So first thing we're gonna do is get a straight edge on both of these hides. So I'm just gonna get a really straight edge here with my utility knife. Okay. And I like to make these to where I make it bigger and then I trim to the exact width. We're gonna make some markings on the back. So to do that, because I only need 1 1/4 inches, I'm just gonna do 2 inches of just total material. It's a little wasteful, I know, but I like having a margin of error. Okay, so once I'm there, I'm going to just apply some double-sided tape to the back of this. I'm gonna be gluing the rest of it so it's much more secure, but this piece just going onto the liner doesn't need to be super secure because it's gonna be sandwiched with glue and stitching between everything else. You wanna put it right in the center of this guy. Now, can you measure that? Of course you can. Will I measure it? Absolutely not. I've talked about it before in other videos, where if you want to get really efficient at leathercraft, you have to start to be able to like eyeball center. You know what, we'll test myself, okay? I'm gonna try and find perfect center, and then we'll measure it, see how close I got. So it's got 5/8 right there. I'd say at most, I'm off 1 millimeter. But that's totally fine. So for the end here, I'm gonna do an English point. I'm gonna measure down. It really doesn't matter how far this way, because you'll be able to trim, but you just wanna make sure that wherever you start on one side, you start on the other. And then you just place 1 point right outside that line, and then you draw your point like this. You can go all the way to the edge, like that. And on the other side, do the same thing. And then where they intersect is where I'm gonna cut. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna glue all of these things together. So I'm using a water-based glue, the Quilliam 315 by Renya. I always glue up against an edge. That way I'm not getting a bunch of glue on my table. Whenever you're doing a glue up, you don't wanna see the white. You essentially wanna spread it until it starts to just look like wet leather. You should go down one edge and flip it around and go over the other. All right, unnecessary step, but if you want like better adhesion with the glue, just rough up the flesh side. I don't like to bevel this because I like this edge to be more defined, but if you want it more subtle, you can like take a 2-edger beveler and take down this edge a little bit. One thing to be sure, make sure you get glue right up to your puff and on top. You just don't want to leave any gap there because you want the top layer to sit right in that groove really tightly, because we want to put our stitching as close to that as we can to really hug it down. Once the glue is nice and clear, it's a little tacky but not wet, you want to put these two pieces together. So try and keep the edges really aligned. We are going to trim, but it'll just make it easier if they're pretty close to perfect when you align them. So whenever I'm gluing things together, for me it's like a 3-step process. First step is to use my hands for the initial glue down. Then I will go over with a roller. Use a hammer too. All right, before I do the sides there, I'm gonna get my bone folder and I'm gonna go right into that groove we talked about before. So if you just apply a bunch of pressure and just keep that round edge right inside there. So once we're there, there's a couple things you can do. You can mark out your stitch lines and then cut everything to size and then stitch it. I like to have more for my presser foot to lay on. So we're actually gonna leave all of these, stitch it first, and then do all the trimming. Gotta make sure, so this is 3/4 of an inch. The total width of the belt is gonna be 1 1/4 like we talked about. So we just have to make sure that we get as close as we can to this with our stitch line. Basically, I want this little puff to line up with the inside of the left of my presser foot, so the needle is gonna go right down the side of it. That'll just give us the best look at the end. And you always wanna check thread tension. So you can see right here, see those little knots you can see coming up through the holes? That means the top thread tension is too tight. I always start the stitch line on belts down here at this end because this end folds over, so it's gonna hide the beginning and the end of the stitch. And I'm gonna do one big circle. Now, if you were really precise with where you laid your puff, you can use your edge guide right here. I'm gonna keep an eye on it because I don't know if I was perfect. I'm gonna use that line for reference more than rely on the edge guide. You can obviously stitch this all by hand. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's hard to fit that into a YouTube video. All right, when you get to the corner, you want to maybe do this stitch by hand by just turning the crank wheel so you can find the exact tip of that point and then rotate on that. Otherwise, it might not just be symmetrical and that would look kind of bad. Hey guys, if you're liking the content, please subscribe. Also know we have a big Black Friday sale coming up, obviously on Black Friday. If you're a member of the website, you get early access a week before. So keep that in mind. Go snag a wallet or a belt or a bag, whatever you want. All right, when you connect back into your stitch line, I always do that by hand cranking so I can find the exact hole and then run a few overlapping stitches. Again, this is all gonna be hidden in the back, but I wanna make sure it's nice and strong. You can see how cleanly those line up. So I used a slightly lighter color thread in the bottom bobbin and then a little more like beige on top because that gives the right contrast. So this stitch line is exactly 1 inch in width. From there, we need 1/8 of an inch on each side to trim off. There's a few ways to do this. You can, if this edge is exactly how you, like exactly straight, then if I get 3/8 inch on this wing divider like this, then that should leave me about 1/8 left. And I'll make sure that I check that before I actually cut. All right. So now here's the scary part. Could use a ruler for this, but I don't trust them. They always slide on me. So I'm gonna go freehand with my Japanese leather knife. I use it backwards so I can keep a vertical blade. And I'm just gonna follow that line with the point I can see. And just go as slow as you need to. I have a short on how to sharpen these leather knives. Definitely want to make sure your knife is nice and sharp for this step. And for the back here, I'm just kind of rounding it out off the corners. The margin's not perfect on both sides. My stitching wasn't perfectly straight, but it's pretty good. We want to make the other point here. Now we could just use, we could go like just to a quarter, whatever, like an 1/8 of an inch or whatever here, and just kind of follow this if we want. And just stay right on the stitch line so it's gonna match. And for this curve cut, I switched the blade around the correct way so I can make this curved cut. Now at this point you could sand the edges down a little bit, but because we trimmed off everything, they're very smooth already. Okay, so if you cut a really straight offcut, this will work perfect for your belt keeper. Let me show you how to measure them up. So basically what you want to know is that 2 layers of leather can get through, because it's gonna be around one end like this, sandwiched in between, and then this is gonna go through to keep it. So the more precise you can make this size, like the more snug fit you're gonna have. So here on the back, I'm gonna wrap it around, super snug. And then once I have that, you can see it kind of sandwiched in there. I'm gonna mark where it goes to, and then like where I want to cut it, like that. So you can see that's where the bottom piece goes to, and then this is where I'm gonna cut the other one. And I'm gonna overlap all this and be able to hand stitch some of that together. But before I do that, I'm gonna stitch this up to make it match everything. Be nice and cute. All right, once you have this stitching around it, I'm gonna grab my edge beveler. Ideally, you wanna skive down the edges that overlap, but I forgot before I stitched it, and so now I can't, but that's totally fine. I'm gonna hit the edges with some brown dye, and then I'm gonna hit it with some burnishing agent. I switched up my burnishing agent recently. I'm using this stuff called Martin's Mix now. This is the stuff. It's a US made company, a US made product too, which is nice. And I really like it because it works in these pens. So I hit it with some of that, burnished it a bit, the wood slicker, and then we'll use some canvas. I find a corner of my cutting mat. That's where I set it in so I can punch some holes in it so I don't go through both sides. Makes it kind of easy. I'm not actually using a pricking iron. I'm just gonna put a few holes with my hole punch. We just wanna make sure it's nice and secure. So all I'm gonna do is just loop these down to the end and then back through the opposite sides. And I'm just gonna do this until I pretty much run out of thread. And to finish the stitch, I like to actually pierce my thread. You can see the needle coming through the thread. That's just gonna hold it even tighter so it doesn't work its way out. First, I'm gonna mark out my holes for the buckles. We're gonna put the actual buckle on with rivets. It's not the most traditional way to do it, but that's okay. Again, they're all hidden. It's the rivets are hidden by the end of the belt, so if you want to just adhere to tradition for tradition's sake, that's fine. We're gonna go right there. That's the hole he's gonna use. And then I go every inch, I make a hole. I'm gonna put just 2 on each side since I know this is really custom and kind of fancy. Don't want a bunch of extra holes. So we got his size in the middle, and then 2 up, and then 2 down. Then we have an appropriate length on the end. It's anywhere from it's like 3 inches on the end. And then for the holes, I'm gonna use size 4mm hole punch, because with a skinnier belt. You don't want the holes too prominent. It's actually cool, you can see the green layer in there. Their initials are DNS and they're getting married 11/12/24, so I'm gonna put that on there. I'm actually gonna marry them, which is pretty cool. So we're just gonna go ahead and trim the edges with the edge beveler. Just using a number 1 right here. You don't wanna remove too much of the edge on a fancier belt. For a casual belt, a number 2 is better. Actually, it just depends how like squared off you want your edges. Sometimes you want like a perfectly round edge. Sometimes you want more of a squared off edge. Now I'm gonna take my time, dye up these edges, and maybe tell you guys a little story. A story about Dylan and Shayna and how they met. Do you know this story?
No.
You don't know it? Okay. Well, once upon a time, I was a young single man. Not that young, but very single. And I started talking to a girl that lived in San Diego. I live in Hawaii, if you didn't know. And anyways, we're talking. I was like, hey, you should come out to Hawaii. I think it'd be really fun. Just hang out, go to the beach, you know, whatever. She's like, yeah, that does sound amazing, but I don't know you. And I was like, true, you should bring a friend. So she brought a friend, but she was like, do you have a friend for my friend? I said, I sure do. And that was 3 years ago. And now Dylan and Shayna are engaged to be married. So what's the moral of the story? I don't know. Find love in unusual places, I guess. Just going back through with the Martin's mix now. After I dyed the edge. But it's nice because it doesn't have wax. If you miss some spots with the dye, you can go back through and do some touch-ups. Inevitably, you'll get a little bit of dye on the back side of the belt. Sometimes I'll do some really fine grit sandpaper, like 1500, and do like a little bit of a corrected grain on the back, and it makes the back almost kind of nappy and smooth. Just want to make sure you don't hit your stitching. You don't want to fray it. Kind of, I don't know if I've never seen anyone else do this, but corrected grain is a very normal thing in leather. They're just like buffing out the imperfections. Sometimes they call it corrected grain, sometimes they'll call it top grain. It's not full grain because they're removing that layer. But this is just a liner, so it doesn't really matter. It just creates like a super supple feel on the back. All right, before we put the buckle on, I'm just gonna hit it with some of our leather balm. An all-natural leather balm that we sell. osleather.com. Adds a little bit of water resistance, a very mild sheen going around the heel. I'm gonna put one rivet in, slide the keeper on, and then put the other one in. You can obviously use Chicago screws here, you could use copper, you can stitch it. Whoops. I just like the ease of rivets. And I've never had rivets like this fail on a belt, ever. All right guys, there it is. As you saw, the fancy belt. Make one yourself. Also, if you haven't seen this video, you can watch how to make a stitching pony from your laser cutter. So click that card up in the corner there, and in case you missed it.